Hello, and welcome to the Media Center's 9th Local Hero Awards series, in which we showcase 5 people from the Mid-Peninsula for outstanding achievement or contribution to the community. We solicited nominations and were especially looking for the unsung heroes. Each winner is an inspiration, and each has a great story to tell. Palo Alto has been the unfortunate victim of a contagion of teen suicides, more than once. Underlying most of these suicides is depression, often undiagnosed. An estimated 80% of those suffering from it do not receive help. There is one young volunteer and professional who is addressing the problem head-on, working directly with students, families, and healthcare professionals. She has educated over 1,500 teens about their own mental wellness. She has co-authored groundbreaking publications that are changing the way we approach the whole field of mental health. Maybe most importantly, she brings a deeply personal experience to the work she does. Sami, how big a problem is depression and suicide? Is it just being diagnosed more, or is it a big problem?
No, it's a pretty significant problem. Amongst teens, it's estimated that just over 10% could be diagnosed with depression by the time they exit high school, but more realistically, kind of experiences with depression of some sort are almost up to a quarter of high school students by the time they graduate.
Is that growing?
Estimates vary because sometimes diagnostic criteria change, but it does seem like more kids are suffering from depression earlier.
Why?
They're not entirely sure. I think a part of it is our culture is a bit more fast-paced. It's not as connected. We don't have as much downtime, and our stress levels are higher, and stress is very highly correlated with depression. It could also be that kind of the way that we're living our lives isn't necessarily super conducive to mental health in the way that it used to be.
What do you mean?
I think it's not getting enough sleep, having kind of higher pressures in our lives at an earlier age, trying to manage doing much, much more, and instead of just being well-rounded, doing everything and being the best. That can provide a ton of stress and also a sense of social isolation if you're not able to spend a lot of time in the kind of supportive relationships with family, friends, other people in the community. That can be a great boon to mental health.
So what do kids lack that we could give them?
I think spending time on relationships, on connections, not always having the value be on the final product, but rather the process itself. Sometimes when we focus so much on what awards are being received or what the kind of caliber, the name of the school that you go to after high school, there can be a sense from the teen's perspective that it doesn't really matter who they are or what they've been doing or their motivations for doing it, as long as kind of the ends are justified. So putting the value and the emphasis back on relationships, on valuing people for who they are instead of what they can do, I think does a great amount to both humanize the people that we spend our time with, but also reassure them that we care about them instead of the function that they can play in our lives.
Now, you have, you've worked in a number of capacities, educating and writing. How do your programs work, and do they work?
I think there's a lot of programs that I'm kind of involved in, so it depends on which one. A program that we help coordinate the implementation and then research component of at a number of Bay Area schools is called Sources of Strength. It's a suicide prevention program that's done on a school-wide level, but instead of just focusing so much on what are the warning signs and what do you do to help someone who's in immediate crisis, it goes a bit upstream, and it uses peers, students, to try to change the way that their friends think of getting help or talking about their problems instead of keeping it to themselves, realizing that it's okay if you're going through a really rough time to reach out, that that's a strong thing to do, it's a brave thing to do, and adults aren't scary, punitive individuals. They actually kind of care about you. So there's those messages, but there's also a component that's looking at kind of what are the things that you can rely on or that keep you strong? What are good things to have in your life? And that's the kind of 8 sources of strength. So it tries to emphasize the importance of those sources of strength, where they're positive friends or healthy activities or having a mentor relationship with an adult or someone who's older than you. But it's also going at it from, we all go through really hard times sometimes. And it's important that when you're going through that, you don't think that you have to go through it alone. And that can be a message that echoes very hollow when it's coming from adults. So that's why the students themselves are the ones who are sharing those messages and sharing stories and personal anecdotes of times that they've been going through a stressful period and they've reached out and gotten help.
So it sounds like a key is the peer-to-peer.
I think in terms of messaging and trying to change social norms is with regard to what you should do and whether it's okay to do it, having personal kind of testimony from people that they view as peers is incredibly powerful. And the great thing about the Sources of Strength program is we work with Peter Wyman and his team at the University of Rochester, and it's one of the biggest kind of peer leader-like research projects that's gone on across the country, and it's shown that it is very, very effective.
Have you seen any success? You're trying to prevent a negative, so that's different from viewing a positive. But what signs of success do you see?
Yeah, with suicide, it's a bit difficult because it's such a rare occurrence, which we're thankful for, but it can be really hard to measure whether you're making an impact. So what we do is we ask them questions about whether they can name adults that they would feel comfortable going to, report on like specific adults that they have gone to in the past to get help, and then kind of reporting on what their thoughts are and attitudes are surrounding help seeking or surrounding kind of taking care of oneself, but also where it's possible evidence of their behavior of having changed. So we look at those 2 components in surveys, and we talk to the peer leaders who are the students who are most kind of centrally involved and see how they feel their conversations with friends have changed or how they feel the climate of the school has changed based on the reception of the projects that they do.
I'd like to talk about depression specifically because I think there are a lot of misconceptions. How is depression different from other mental and physical illnesses?
Well, depression's really common, and I think it's a bit unfortunate since until 15, 25 years ago, our brain was essentially just a black box. That had been a metaphor for it for a really long time, but we had no idea what happened in there because we couldn't see into it, and we couldn't see into it when it was functioning. So because of that, and because the brain really is an organ just like any other, it's just an incredibly complex one, we created this false dualism in a sense that physical illness, if it was a broken arm or diabetes, was an entirely different thing from mental illness. But in reality, I think mental illness and physical illness are just illness. And even though it's affecting the organ that we really closely associate with who we are and what we are and how we think and our identity, that can make it a bit more difficult for people to see it as, no, maybe this is neurochemical or maybe this is hormonal or something else. And there is a physical basis for it that can be helped and treated just like anything else.
Is there a difference between, what is the difference between genuine clinical depression and feeling sad?
I think some of the issues with people not taking depression seriously, with thinking that it's something that's really ephemeral and you get over and maybe it's somebody being dramatic, is the sense that we use the word depression in a lot, or depressed in a lot of contexts. It's a clinical disorder. It has pretty stringent diagnostic criteria. You have to have one of either feeling depressed or feeling anhedonia, which is you don't get pleasure from things, you're not interested in the things that you used to like for at least 2 weeks, and then 5 out of 9 other symptoms. So if you're going to a psychiatrist or a therapist or a doctor, that's what depression is to them. But people in daily life say, oh my God, I'm feeling so depressed, when really they might be upset or frustrated or just tired. But since we have a lot more exposure to the people who are equating feeling depressed with something that's really fairly insignificant, people believe that they will not be taken seriously, or the true extent of what they're experiencing really won't be understood if they come back and say, no, I'm not just depressed, I have depression, and that's not something I can get over on my own, nor should I.
So tell me about your experience with depression.
I've been depressed before. It runs in the family, which is something that I didn't find out until much, much later. But because of kind of social isolation and stress and a lot of crazy stuff going on, I probably started experiencing depression clinically in middle school, and then throughout high school, and then throughout most of college. And until I got to college, I never really thought that it was something that could be treated or that deserved to be treated. I thought it was just a problem with me, and this was the way my life was going to be.
And what was the problem, or what was the way life was how did it manifest itself?
I felt terrible all of the time. I was never happy. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh, I stayed in my room. Most of the time I was still kind of very much a perfectionist, so I spent a lot of time on my work and classwork, but I had this false notion that like 100% in a class meant that I was giving 100% of the effort, and that meant I was kind of 100% value as a human being, and anything less than that was not acceptable. That was never kind of a rule or a value that was put down to me by my parents at all, and they would be aghast if they thought that I was thinking that, but that was kind of something that I could focus on. Like, I couldn't focus on people yelling at me or calling me worthless or a waste of time, but I could focus on like doing really well at school, because I knew exactly how to do that. But people weren't calling you worthless. Well, they were. I did gymnastics for a really long time growing up, and there was just a really bad coaching situation for the last 2 years, and the friends that I'd known forever had quit. So it was kind of me in a school that I was really not happy with, since all of my time was either schoolwork or gymnastics, and then going to gymnastics and facing a really kind of terrible verbal abuse situation, where I was actually being told that. That didn't make it true, and it didn't make it valid, but when you're 13 or 14 and already feeling really down all the time and questioning kind of how good you are, whether you have a place, hearing that takes on added significance, even if it isn't true.
So tell me about the process whereby you came out, as it were. Owned this, owned it, and realized what was going on.
It was actually a friend who'd had depression. He was older, pointed out to me that just something was wrong and that I needed help for it. I think that without that, I probably would have continued going on for a while, being miserable, until I got to a point where I just wasn't functioning, and wasn't eating and wasn't sleeping, and really was so extreme.
What, you mean it had reached that point?
Well, it did eventually, when I was getting treatment and I wasn't responding to it well. And that's what depression looks like when it's severe. Up until that point, I was still somewhat functional. I was not happy, and it took a lot more effort to give the appearance of being okay than you really should put that much energy into. But I thought that was normal.
So tell me about that point where it moved on. To when you really were beyond just dealing with things.
Well, I think that's kind of a misperception about depression that stems a little bit from people using the word depressed or depression very, very freely. Is that depression and a lot of mental health issues aren't black and white. It's not like you just have it or you don't have it, and every person who has it, it looks exactly the same. Depression exists on a continuum. It can be really mild, where you're just not feeling all that great, but you're generally able to do most things, and maybe you can feel happy some of the time, to kind of moderate where it's really hard for you to feel okay and to make other people assume that you are okay, and it extends at school, at home, throughout all areas of your life. And then severe can be when you literally can't get out of bed or leave your room for weeks at a time. It feels like you have, well, for me, it felt like having like a 50-pound bag of cement on me.
And that happened to you, that
Yeah,
feeling?
it did. So kind of the severe episodes of depression that I've had has been totally non-functional and losing a ton of weight, and it feels like you can't think because your brain is either working too slow or it's so distracted. You can sit and stare at a wall for hours at a time because it takes too much effort to move away from it. It's way different than being slightly upset by something and saying, oh my God, I'm so depressed. That can be what depression looks like when it's severe. And unfortunately, there tends to be a greater likelihood of it progressing and getting worse, and to that point, if you don't get help early.
So you got help, maybe not early, but you got help.
I eventually got help, yeah. And I haven't dealt with an episode like that in at least 2.5 or 3 years. So, and I never imagined that that could be something that I would experience, not feeling that terrible or not feeling paralyzed by it for any stretch of time.
Wait, so you never imagined feeling good? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That seemed like totally inaccessible to me. That seemed so impossible. I felt that I would just, it was my lot in life to just kind of suffer through it, and I somehow deserved it. But that's all about how depression makes you feel. And that's kind of what your brain is thinking and what's possible for it and for you when you're dealing with clinical depression. It's just kind of the reality of it. Your brain is the thing that's affected, and your brain is the thing that's keeping you from feeling that anything could ever change, that it could ever get better, and if it were possible that things could get better, that you would deserve for them to be better.
So you came 180 degrees. You became the go-to person as a Stanford undergraduate for other people, back to that peer-to-peer. And there's a program called SPOM, I understand.
Yeah, Stanford Peace of Mind.
Right. So tell me about that and the importance of talking about it.
Well, I guess this could be a difference between mental health issues and physical health issues, is if you break your ankle, you have a cast and you have crutches, and everybody can kind of tell that something's wrong, and they'll ask about it and know. With mental health issues, it takes a ton of energy, but it's not like you have a scarlet D saying depressed on you, or something that you're branded as being different in dealing with a mental health issue. A lot of really high-functioning, very intelligent, very smart, successful people have mental health issues. It's just they work very hard to have it not affect their public persona. So unless you share that story, people are going to think that they're alone in their experience. So everybody's going to go along thinking, I'm the only one who's sad, I'm the only one who's not really enjoying themselves here, I'm the only one who's feeling guilty for feeling this way, when in reality, it's not the case at all.
And there is yet a sense of shame around it too, even, isn't there?
I think so. I think there's a sense when, and we get this when we talk to the high schoolers, that they can't point to anything being wrong in their life. Like, they look at their life and say, I go to a great school, I have friends, I have a family that isn't dysfunctional, I have all of this privilege, and how is it that I can be depressed? So they feel guilty over being depressed or being anxious or having something be wrong when they feel they have no reason to feel that way, and that kind of invalidates it for them. But that just is kind of a fact of education, where they didn't know before that you don't have to have some kind of external reason to feel depressed. It could just be that your brain chemistry changes, or your genes aren't totally working well in terms of your brain, and you can feel all the symptoms of depression, and it's just as valid a case of depression as somebody who can point to a ton of external things in their life and say, it makes sense that I'm depressed.
So you do have a couple of, you have a lot of messages for parents and for friends. What are a couple of the things that we might get wrong? In other words, you've said that common sense isn't always your best sense. So what are some guidelines for parents or people who might know somebody who might be suffering from depression?
I mean, I would say the first thing would be, don't be afraid to talk about it. A lot of times there's a ton of second guessing on the kid's behalf, but also the parents, that it might be seen as intrusive or accusatory if they come up and ask, hey, kind of what's going on? I've noticed that you've been a little bit different. And sometimes people ask in a way that really isn't received all that well. And so if they ask it that way one time, they feel, I can never broach this subject again. So if you're a parent that's concerned, or if you're a peer that's concerned about your friend, I would say just ask them if you notice that something has been different. It's a lot better to say something that provides evidence for why you're expressing concern than to just flat out say what's wrong with you, because that comes a little accusatory and the kid might think, oh God, like nothing can be wrong, so I'm just going to say I'm fine. But if you say, I'm kind of concerned, I've noticed that you haven't been hanging out with us, you seem really kind of sad in class, or you're not a part of the conversation, you're up all night, all the time, and you just aren't the person I used to know, and I'm worried about you, and that's why I'm asking. You can tell me if something's wrong. Giving permission to talk about it is really important, because it's not assumed.
Now you're about to leave, you're about to go to graduate school. As you leave this community that you've been so close to, what is your wish for this area, for the people that you've served?
I don't think it's quite an issue right now, but in future years, hopefully when there aren't any more adolescent deaths to suicide, it's to remember that even if you can't see the effect that you're having, it doesn't mean that you should stop putting that effort out. Suicide prevention is something that always needs to have a sense of urgency. That mental health education and promotion is something that always needs to be there. And it's not just something that can rest in the background. It really needs to be at the forefront, because the worst thing that can happen is to not maintain that sense of urgency and have another tragedy and be left with thoughts of, could we have done something to prevent this?
Well, best of luck in your new career and with all the work that you do. Thanks very much for coming, and congratulations on the award.
Thank you.
Do you know someone who has overcome significant hardship and has an inspiring story to tell? Someone who has sacrificed or given over and above to the community and deserves some recognition? If so, please contact us with your nomination for next year's Local Hero Awards. To find out more about our local heroes and to watch interviews with all the winners, visit our website, midpennmedia.org. At the Mid-Penn Media Center, you can make your own videos and television programs and take classes in all aspects of media production. You can also hire our professional services team. To find out more about that, go to mcproservices.com. Congratulations to all our winners, and thank you for watching.